This is Seagulls Player.
Paul, we spoke in part one about the managerial appointment. I'd urge anyone to watch that if they haven't already. But also, while that was going on, you had the small matter of the Football League AGM. What can you tell us, particularly about, I think Greg Dyke was there to discuss B-League proposals?
Sure. Well, this is the annual gathering of representatives from all 72 clubs, chairmen and chief executives. It takes place in Portugal, mainly as a way of isolating people from their day-to-day jobs. Otherwise, if you do it in England, someone's always going to be close to their club and usually disappears and goes back to do the things they need to do. So, to get us out of the country, we're there for 3 days. It's a series of meetings from usually 8:30 in the morning until 6 at night. And you know, the key thing this year was obviously financial fair play. Another big debate on that. We also debated, with the help of Greg Dyke, the whole B-League proposal, B-Team proposal, which was hotly debated, and then a series of other, you know, more mundane, run-of-the-mill annual meeting type stuff where league rules get slightly amended and so on and so forth.
So with the B-League, I understand there's very little appetite from Football League.
Yeah, I think the most important thing, and this is where I stand on it, is that one of the unique things that we have in football in this country is our pyramid system. It is a near perfect system that many countries across the world have attempted and are attempting still, certainly in the case of the US, to replicate, where, you know, we have a natural progression of teams through a system to ultimately play at the elite level. And in my opinion, any attempt to in any way damage the integrity of that pyramid is a road to ruin, and it's a dangerous road, because I think that we have something which is very special. It works. It allows for a progression for players of improving ability to continually play at a higher level, and I think any artificial interference with that is going to be rejected by those clubs either side of wherever that interference occurs. In this case, it would have been those clubs in League Two and those clubs in the conference, which would potentially have been affected. So there was a rejection of the proposal. Quite a few of our colleagues in the lower league clubs spoke out very passionately and very articulately, but non-personally, against Greg's proposal. And as he himself said, look, this is just an idea. It's not necessarily the best idea or the only idea, but it is an idea. And I think in that sense, the Football League clubs deserve credit for debating it constructively without it becoming in any way a personal attack on Greg Dyke or the FA.
And I understand there was a rejection of the idea that clubs might become feeder clubs for the bigger clubs with what they call strategic loan partnerships. Yeah,
again, I think there was some degree of nervousness around anything that affects the integrity of the competition. Any club that may get an advantage over another club, it just seems to be wrong when we've got a system and a pyramid system that works very well with the current loan systems that we have. You know, sometimes we're not always in favour of emergency loans because they can be disruptive, but on the other hand, for some clubs at certain times, they can also be lifesavers. So, you know, that's one part of the system that probably will come under more scrutiny and more review. The longer term loans can actually be hugely beneficial, as we've seen here at this football club over the last few seasons in particular. So, you know, we certainly shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We know that there's got to be an improved system for getting younger players more game time at a more competitive level in more competitive games. We all accept that that's an important way of developing footballers, but some of the proposals so far put forward don't necessarily work, and therefore the Football League clubs in particular felt that they were not something we want to accept or move forward with at this time.
Having invested obviously a huge sum in the new training facility, I guess that's where we see the future as a club that's invested in its academy, that is aspiring to be a Category 1 club with the new EFFP rulings. I guess that's where we see the future. The club should be developing in-house their own talent.
We do, and you know, £30 million is a lot of money to spend on a facility that, you know, potentially, you know, we could put at risk if there are other systems in place that in any way sort of, you know, subvert that system. And you know, we put a lot of emphasis on developing young players for a long time. We haven't had the facilities, we haven't had the infrastructure at Brighton to do that, and as a consequence we've lost some of our young players to other clubs. In fact, here just a couple of weeks ago we entertained Fulham and we entertained Bournemouth, and you know, Fulham had a couple of young players who were Sussex-based players who had gone to Fulham because they were a Premier League club with better facilities and better opportunities than we could have provided 2 or 3 years ago. That's not going to happen in the future, because any parent in Sussex who looks at what we're developing at Lancing, looks at the opportunity, looks at the pathway through to playing in the first team in a stadium like this, it's probably going to give some of the bigger London clubs a little bit of a second look and probably a swerve away, because they suddenly realise that their son has potentially the better opportunity to play first team football with the Albion. That's something which 2 or 3 years ago was a decision those parents probably wouldn't have made, because they would have perceived that their son would have been better off making those journeys to London 2, 3, 4 times a week to get the better coaching in the better facilities at the bigger clubs. That's no longer going to be the case, and that's got to be good for our future.
One player who obviously made that choice was Christian Walton. I've seen speculation linking him with bigger clubs. Can you keep hold of him specifically and those other young players, that young talent?
Well, it all goes back to what I said in the other interview about, top talent in any business, whether it's a manager, whether it's an executive, whether it's, in our case, a player, is always going to be looked upon favourably and enviously by bigger competitors or potentially bigger clubs. That's something which we just have to accept. It's always going to be the case. We do the same to clubs smaller than us. We look at their talent. Christian's a good example in that case. What we have to do is to make sure that the environment that they're in is the best it can be, the pathway that we provide for them is as clear as it can be, and then when the opportunities come, that those lads take them. And we reward them when they do well by improving their contracts or keeping them here or making sure they see plenty of first team football, and those things combined hopefully will see off any interest from other clubs. And any young player who's highly rated and highly talented is always going to have opportunities to move at some stage in their career. What they have to do is to weigh up what the best option for them is, and whether that's first team football at a slightly lower level or under 21 football at a higher level, potentially in a bigger club. They're the decisions that are quite tricky, and they're not easy for people to make. We've just simply got to do the best that we can do here and play at the highest level we can. That way we've got a better chance of keeping our young players.
How proud have the club been of the international call-ups over the summer? Obviously Solly and Jake starring for the under-20s in the tournament in France, and Christian as well playing for the under-19s.
It's fantastic. I mean, when we go around the country, and particularly to some of the bigger clubs that we've played, and we see their international honours boards and the lists of players that they have playing at international level, well, our board is now beginning to grow, and the status that this club has is beginning to grow and be recognised. And I think that's not only to the players' credit, but also to the coaches' credit in terms of the way these youngsters are coming through. They're being developed, they're getting noticed. We have more visits now from people like Roy Hodgson and Gareth Southgate and Roy Keane and Martin O'Neill than we have had for many years. That's because we've got players here that those international managers are really interested in seeing, and a facility and an environment here that they feel that those young players are developing in. And again, that's got to be credit to the Albion and everything that's been done here in recent years. Talking
about holding on to talent, one player we have seen a little bit of speculation around, Leo Ulloa. Can you shed any light on that in terms of possible links with Premier League clubs, including Leicester and Southampton?
It comes back to what I said before. There's always going to be offers put forward for players that are of a significant talent, and we will see that time and time again, not only as we develop our own talent and see that interest, but also as we buy players that others have missed or failed to spot. That player then does well, and there'll always be an interest in those players from clubs at a higher level. We're not in a position where we have to sell anyone. We're in a position where we want to progress. We're in a position where we want to mount another challenge for getting to the Premier League, and that requires us assembling a very, very good squad of players. That's exactly what we'll do.
In terms of January, obviously players departed for which the club gained good fees for, significant fees for. I understand you also turned down significant bids for other players. Is the club under pressure to sell players?
No, not under pressure at all. The players that we sold were players that wanted to leave the football club or were very close to the end of their contracts and wanted to leave the football club. In those situations, you have to take a balanced judgment as to whether holding on to them is going to be, good or better for the team, or whether it's going to be detrimental to the team. You also have to consider whether the value that's on offer is actually going to be better reinvested in the squad. Those judgments are not made just by people in suits. They're made by the manager manager who has to decide whether that player is needed in the squad or can be managed without in the squad. And from that point of view, the players that we sold, it was considered that the value on offer was right and that they could actually be replaced. And in that situation, we move on and work with the players that we have at the time.
In terms of recruitment, moving ahead, has the managerial change affected the club's recruitment plans over the summer? Has it slowed them down in any way?
No.
I think there was a fear amongst fans that we needed the club to make a quick appointment so we wouldn't miss out on players.
Yeah, 25 days is how long the appointment took, and during that period everybody in the football club's recruitment area was continuing to work as normal. This is a process, a machine, if you like.
Can you take us through that whole process? Because we see a lot written and a lot of speculation from journalists and commentators on message boards and so on and so on. But just take us through that process. If you're Sammy Hooper, how is that going to work for you?
Sure. Well, we have a recruitment department which is ultimately led by David Burke. They're constantly looking at players from all over the world. Some of those scouts are employed by us on a part-time basis and feed information in. Some of those scouts are employed by us on a fuller-time basis and they're feeding information in. David and his team then are compiling that information centrally. They're constantly talking to the coaches about the sort of players that we want to play the sort of football that we play, the sort of players that are available, what kind of contract lengths, what kind of value that they might secure in the market, what kind of wages that they might be expecting. So therefore building up an ongoing picture. There is this perception, I think, sometimes in football that nothing happens in between transfer windows, and as soon as the transfer window opens, suddenly we start scouting, and then there's a list of players developed, and it's from that list that we choose the players that we want to go after. The reality is this is an ongoing process. There's constant talking with the manager, constant talking with the other coaches, looking at the players we've got, when are their contracts coming to an end, is there interest in them, should we be moving players on, should we be bringing other players in, what's coming on from below, are there youngsters coming through the under-21 team that could fill those spots? And obviously last season we saw with Jake and with Solly and Rowan, we had 3 fantastic young players that pushed themselves into the first team setup, partly because of circumstance and partly because obviously they've got great ability. But this is an ongoing process. It doesn't actually begin or end with a manager. It doesn't begin or end with a transfer window. It's an inclusive process that is ongoing the whole time.
Can the manager throw in a name though out of left field?
Of course, managers.
So if he's got a list of, say, goalkeepers that the club might want to recruit for next season, but he has an idea in his mind, has he got the? I guess he's entitled to throw that name in and go after that player.
No one has an exclusive license on producing a list of good players, and anybody in the football club can actually put forward an idea at any time, and obviously the manager is going to be in a very, very good and strong position to do that. But ultimately the manager is the person who has to work with the players, pick the team, get results. Of course it's going to be his decision whether a player is bought or sold, because at the end of the day, it's his responsibility to get the best possible results. Now, there's always going to be players out there that are on a list, but they're not attainable. And they're not attainable because either they're under a long contract, their club won't sell them, they don't want to come south, we can't afford them, their wage demands are too high. That happens at every club in the world. Brighton Hove Albion are no different, Real Madrid are no different. There are times when they can't get the players they want either. And there could be a whole range of factors involved in that. I've been in situations where we haven't been able to get a player because his wife won't move, or because the kids are settled, or because actually he genuinely wants to see out his contract because he's promised that he would. These are all situations and circumstances that sometimes are out of a football club's control, but they're the realities of life, and we have to just deal with them and get on with them and move on to the next thing. One thing we will never have is just one person on a list. There will always be number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and so it will go on. Partly because, as I said before, it's an ongoing, continuous process, and so it should be.
So I guess at some point at the moment, Sammy's being furnished with a list of players, potential targets, and he's already plenty of information and data on each of those targets.
David and Sammy have been talking almost non-stop since the day we took the decision, and likewise information has been going backwards and forwards, texts have been going backwards and forwards, phone calls have been happening, names have been put into the ring, names have been crossed off a list, names have been put on a list. That's the nature of football. That's the nature of football, not just in a transfer window, but all the way through the year, because we're all watching games all of the time. And what I know about football people, perhaps more than any other, is they become quite obsessive about watching games. So very often they've just finished coaching or managing in a game, and they get back to their room, there's another game on, everything stops while they watch that. They get home, they watch a video or something they've recorded from another game somewhere else the same night. That's the nature of the business. And sometimes we read things that the manager wasn't involved, or he didn't want that player, or he didn't select that player, he wasn't involved. Absolute nonsense. And the number of times we look at that and laugh, because the reality is so far sometimes from people's perceptions of what actually happens. But that's again the world we're living in. That's the way things are these days with the way the media works.
Those out of contract players, been any developments in terms of new deals for the players that the club wish to retain? And is there any potential for that list to change at all with input from Sammy?
There's always potential, and that's why we try and take very early decisions on the players we know that we want to keep, and we did, and those players that we are not so sure about keeping, and therefore they become effectively released and able to search for new contracts elsewhere. If those players haven't received contracts elsewhere, and the manager that comes in sits down and says, well, actually, that is a player that I'd like to keep for this reason or that reason, or the style of play that I'm going to be adopting would fit that player even better, then of course that's an entirely open book as far as we're concerned. As I said before, the manager, working very, very closely with the chairman and with David and the scouting team, will come to those decisions. And that's something now, those discussions will take place over the days and weeks ahead. There's a lot of work to be done, and Sammy will be very much at the centre of all of that.
So in terms of new contracts, is it a case of waiting for Sammy to almost sign off on those for the likes of Bruno, Calde, those players that was intimated would be kept for next season?
Yeah, Sammy now will sit down with the chairman and literally go through every single member of the squad and where we are, and he'll come to his decisions.
And put those offers to those players?
Absolutely.
Matthew Upson, obviously one that the club did wish to keep. Disappointed that he's gone, I guess, but on the other hand, he's going back to the Premier League.
Matthew has done such a fantastic job for us over the period of time that he was here. He played more games than I think people expected him to. His performance levels in those games were fantastic. He was just a great professional around the football club. I mean, anything he was asked to do, he did it with great style, great dignity, great grace, good with the media, good with the sponsors, good with the community, and rightly got our Player of the Year. And obviously we wanted to keep him. He was a very, very important and influential member of the squad. But when you're Matthew's age, with the greatest respect to him, and a Premier League club offer you a contract, and no doubt at Premier League level wages, which is clearly not where we can be at this time, you can't blame Matthew for wanting to play at the highest level perhaps one more time in his career, and in that regard, do you think
he might have signed now if he was in a position he knew who the manager was, or
maybe?
Or do you think it was the lure of the Premier League?
I think any footballer that I've ever met wants to play at the highest level that they possibly can at any given point in their career. And for Matthew at 34, coming up 35 years of age, I think it's going to be a wonderful opportunity for him to have a last crack at the Premier League. And he's certainly good enough, and he certainly deserves it. And he left with our best wishes, and it took time. This is a measure of the man to speak to myself, the chairman, to David Burke, to thank everybody for what he'd been offered to stay, and would have been delighted to stay, but the opportunity to play in the Premier League was just too much to resist, and we understand that, and we wish him well.
And finally, when that new squad comes together, they'll be wearing a new kit. The fans just want to know when they can get their hands on it.
Very soon, very soon. I mean, we always said that we would get it out in time for people to hopefully go on their summer holidays with their kit, depending on when their summer holidays were, of course. But typically around when the kids break up from school, the back end of July, people tend to go away, get away for the early part of August. And from that point of view, the kit will be out there. You always have to balance in a World Cup or European Championship tournament year when you launch a new kit. You either do it right at the end of a season, ahead of the madness that accompanies the tournaments, or you tend to do it most of the way through a tournament towards the back end of a tournament, so that you have a fair chance of the kit getting noticed by people in the World Cup or European Championship madness. If you're with an existing kit supplier, it's always easier to do it right at the end of the previous season, because you've got the relationship and you've got the process already underway. When you're working with a new kit manufacturer, that's very different. You have to respect the outgoing manufacturer's contract right up until the final day, and then you have a new period, and invariably at this time of year, World Cup madness has taken over. So we took a decision to hold it back, to keep people waiting a little bit. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, people will start to see a few teasers. They'll start to see what the training kit looks like. They'll start to see what the playing shirt looks like. But we're working with a world-class brand, and we're really excited about that.
But no actual date as yet.
We have got a date, but we haven't revealed it yet.
You're not going to tell me?
Not just yet, not just yet. And again, it's just about making sure that we pick our moment. And you know, as I said, during a World Cup, picking your moment is hard, because if England are going well, then everybody's attention is going to be focused on the Three Lions. If we've bombed out, then everyone will turn their attention back to their clubs, and will want to know what's happening there. So we'll pick our moment, but it will be in time, as we said, for the school holidays.